Hi everyone, my name is Christina Perla.
And my name is Janet Carr. Welcome to another episode of the Woman in 3D Printing podcast. Hit that subscribe button, follow us on LinkedIn, and get to know the stories of these awe-inspiring women.
We'd also like to give a shout out to our platinum sponsors, HP, Trumpf, Matter Hackers, GE Additive, and Dassault for making all of this even possible.
Thank you so much, Amy Karle, for joining us for the TIPE 3D Printing Conference.
Thanks for having me.
For those that don't know Amy is a bioartist, and she is working on some fantastic projects to help bridge additive and art and bio all together, and will be moderating a panel. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, Amy, before we jump into today's podcast?
Hi, yes, I'm really looking forward to moderating the panel, which is centered around the theme of pushing the limits of additive manufacturing in healthcare. I'm going to be also a panelist because it's going to be more of like a podcast, open discussion style. The other just amazing women that are joining us are Chengxi Wang of Satori, Jenny Chen, who founded 3D Heals, and Laura Kastenmeier of Trumpf. We're excited to share our conversations with the audience. I think people will be excited to listen in how we currently push the limits of additive manufacturing in healthcare and our moonshots for if sky's the limit and we could do anything we could envision where we would take it.
That's really exciting. But today is not about the panel. Today is about you, Amy. And what we really want to know is get to know who you are so folks could learn about your story before the TIPE conference. Amy, what launched your career into additive manufacturing? You've got such a diverse background.
What I got into additive manufacturing was because of the tool set. I was taking the bigger picture of my mindset and applying that to this tool set. I have been interested in healing and enhancing the body since a very young age. I was born with a life-threatening birth defect, and I had many experimental surgeries until one worked when I was a teenager. So growing up, I was always interested in medical futuring for healing and enhancing the body. You know, I just wanted to be like other kids. But there was also this aspect of being in touch with the human condition and that like emotional relationship as well to the body and healthcare. I grew up in a household of healthcare professionals. My father was a pharmacist. My mother was a biochemist and pharmacologist, and I used to help her in the lab. So I was really comfortable in that kind of environment and accepting of those ideas. I work as an artist because that's the language I speak best. That's the way that I communicate the best. Some other background too is that I grew up in the home of IBM. So when I was a kid, I used to go on field trips and see these, rooms full of giant computers, kind of like the analog computer behind me now. And we were really painted this picture of a future when we are our age of our technologies and biotechnologies being able to empower us to lead a healthier and more enlightened future. And we've done that in some ways. But in a lot of ways, we also have not embraced those opportunities that these kinds of tools present themselves with. So I actually use a whole suite of exponential technologies, of which additive manufacturing and 3D printing and biotechnology is part of. I'm really looking at this time we're at of humans and technology merging. When you look at somebody with a pacemaker in front of you, you see someone whose life has been saved. You don't see a cyborg or something. And I'm considering, how can we use our tools for our best and highest good? How can we enhance humanity? How can we heal our body, heal our planet? And make a more sustainable and healthier future. There's, of course, a lot of ethical issues that arise in that I'm also questioning. So as an artist, I'm looking at this whole range of possibilities, from very enlightened future to our ultimate demise through our technologies. And I'm using those actual tools in the art making process as I'm asking these questions. If I can also make some advancements in the process, that's even better. A lot of my artwork functions to be more of a provocateur, to ask these important questions about how can we use our technologies to enhance ourselves and enhance our future.
You've probably dabbled in a lot of philosophical questions. to think about what the future might look like for our human race. Just
Totally.
curious.
I actually have a degree in philosophy. So yeah, this is like part of the story that helps me to ask these kinds of very important questions. When I think of bioprinting, I think about making replacement parts and organs. There's all these philosophical questions and ethical questions that arise with that. Like if we could make replacement parts, who would be able to have access to that? Who would be able to get that first? At least in America, it would probably be for people who need transplants. But then what happens as we get older and we start to age? Would we be able to get our organs switched out then? Does that mean we would lead longer lives? Like modern medicine has done a really good job of keeping us alive to a whole lifespan, but it hasn't been able to help us live to 300 years, 500 years. Bioprinting and making new organs may be able to help us do that. But then it brings up all these questions like, who would be able to live that long? How would we choose those people? What about rights to death if people don't want to live that long? So these are the kind of questions that we actually have to start thinking about now, because we are moving forward with this. And if we have these questions in mind and can start to address them as a global community, we can build these ethics into our technologies.
And who are other leading folks like yourselves that are thinking about these questions? A lot of times when we're at the additive conferences, we're really talking about how to make this happen. What are the technical resources we have, or what other R&D initiatives we must invest in to bridge gaps? But here you are thinking about the ethics, and that's a point of view we often don't get.
I think actually a lot of people are thinking about the ethics, and I'm here to encourage a lot of the tech companies across the spectrum of additive and beyond, of any ways of our interacting with our digital technologies that transform who we are, to have philosophers and ethicists on staff, for the biotech companies to have bioethicists on staff to help ask these questions. And that kind of brings us to important conversation around the importance of collaboration across disciplines when using additive manufacturing and exponential technologies. And that if we work together, we can make a lot more advancements.
Well, when you say exponential technologies, what does that mean for you?
So exponential technologies are technologies that have an impact that grows at an exponential rate. So if we start to use a biotechnology, this is an example where human engineering can happen a lot faster than natural selection, and we can't undo that process. This is why I use this term exponential technologies. When we look at things like additive manufacturing, artificial intelligence, machine learning, quantum computing, a lot of these areas that feed into additive manufacturing, and additive manufacturing can have a nice digital suite with that then merges with the biological and the physical. This is when it has such a huge global impact that it affects our beings. It affects us on a personal level, on a social level, on a global level. It co-evolves with our environment. We have now changed our food supply, our weather systems, global warming. A lot of this has to do with our exponential technologies.
And in terms of exponential technology for additive, are we at the exponential level yet, or are we just at the beginning from your perspective?
I don't know. I think we're teetering, we're cascading into the exponential level right now. It is considered an exponential technology. And I think when we really start getting into the bioprinting and the biotechnologies, then it is exponential. But some of the applications are then exponential. I'm not sure the degree that bioprinting is used for COVID vaccine therapies as an example, but that would be an exponential application. It's actually something I've been trying to research, but I think the research is happening so fast that we don't have the white papers released yet. So I'm not sure what people are doing in the field yet. I've been looking up a lot of what are we doing with COVID-19 and bioprinting, because we always hear about the supply chain issues of using additive manufacturing and 3D printing to make PPE, to make durable medical goods. But there's other applications as well that are happening more in the lab.
Yeah, that's a fascinating point of view. I do know that Anne Debauche, Director of Packaging at L'Oreal, did share on the last podcast that L'Oreal has been invested in bioprinting to help develop skin so that we don't need to do animal testing as much per se and test on simulated human skin. I guess that is a form of exponential technology, because that means we don't have to do certain things that are less unethical.
And it's interesting to think about even that side of the COVID-19 and 3D printing that we always think about, which is the supply chain issue that we couldn't meet the international demands of the masks and PPE and some of the durable medical equipment. I would question too if that was actually like an exponential tipping point now that a lot more people are using it out of necessity.
Another topic I would love to touch on is I went on your website and I probably fangirled all over it. What you've been working on is so fascinating. What is your process of thinking about developing art with 3D printing? It's not something you see very often at museum exhibits.
That's true. There's not a lot of 3D printed artwork in museums. I think the difference for me is that the reason that I'm using 3D printing is because of the things that I could make with this tool that I couldn't make in any other way. So I'm not just saying, oh, I could make this sculpture in clay, or I could make this sculpture in some way. When I'm using bioprinting, really the only way I can create that is by using a bioprinter. I approach the additive manufacturing tool set by coming to it with an idea. And this is how I encourage other people too to get involved. Like, bring your ideas, bring your passion to the tool set, and then see how would you use those tools to create something that you couldn't make in any other way. When we start to play with that, we learn from that process, and a lot of things arise, like a new aesthetic will arise. And then also different things come up in the process too that make you start to think differently. So you think about how you can engineer things differently. There's this co-evolution that happens with the tools and the technology and the development of the concept into form. When I have an idea of an artwork that I want to create, a lot of times I'm asking questions about enhancing the body or evolution. And I look at the science and the research that's being done in the field. And then I take that research and I try to work with it in an artistic way. I'm working with the live systems as artistic subjects, and I'm questioning the impact that they have on humanity, or in our environment, on our world, on our future. So I have to use some of those tools in the process if I am replicating some of the scientific research or some of the proposed ideas in medical futuring that are using those exact tools. My artwork can be seen as artifacts of a speculative future. And I say that because I'm thinking about the future and I'm using the tools that we would use in the process of these speculative ideas of how we can enhance our bodies, enhance our world, and also project into the future. I'm using those tools to actually get there. And then the artwork that I make in the process is an artifact of that inquiry.
You also work with sci-fi companies to build their models. Just curious.
I don't see my work as science fiction.
Okay.
Because it's actually, it is in this gray zone of that speculative science fiction, but it's in that realm of that really good science fiction is working with the leading scientists and technologists. And they're doing that research to be able to more accurately tell these stories. I'm actually using the real tools and collaborating with scientists and technologists. So it's not so sci-fi, even if we haven't been able to put it into mainstream media, even if we're still questioning how these experiments would work, how they could look, if they could be implanted into the body or not. These are the kinds of questions that I'm asking. This is where an ethicist, a philosopher could also work with a company and ask these questions in their own way. I ask it through art.
I love it. And what kind of technologies do you use today? I was wondering if there's any kind of bioprinter, other type of mainstream technology that is accessible.
I've used a whole range of different kinds of printers. The type of printer and tool that I use depends on a few factors. So I have a lot of corporate sponsorships. For example, HP Labs has been recently sponsoring my work on the heart. So I use their 3D printers to use that. So I have to maybe make some adjustments to what I'm doing to fit that kind of printing. Likewise, if I want something that has a circuit in it, then I have to go to a certain kind of printer that has a circuit. Or if I want to hack a printer because I need to use hydrogel, for example, then I have to find a printer that will do that. This really covers a whole range of at-home desktop printers to advanced manufacturing.
And to achieve the certain finish or the visual experience, physical touch experience that you want to be able to deliver, are there certain challenges you're facing in additive manufacturing that limits you? in a certain way here?
No, I don't think there's limitations. Limitations are always challenges, or I think there's some corny quotes about this that we could look up, but the limitations of the technology offer a lot of opportunities, and the limitations of what we can create offer a lot of opportunities. So right now I'm really interested in bioprinting vasculature. And I want to bioprint something that is a human scale. So when I'm working on the heart design, we can bioprint some vasculature. It's not totally viable. It's done on a really small scale in a lab. And that's where I come in as an artist, and in collaboration can really push the technology and push the research forward. Another example is regenerative reliquary, which is 3D printed scaffolds for stem cell culture into bone in the shape of a hand design installed in a bioreactor. So this uses human mesenchymal stem cells to grow tissue into bone. The requirements of the artwork were that I wanted something that was recognizable on a human scale. And if we look at all the bones in our body, our skulls and our hands are most recognizable. In order to make something that big, we had to push the technology forward because we had to be able to process something that roughly represents all the cells in a human hand bone. Then we had to get that data to a 3D printer. We had to develop new hydrogel materials to make sure that they didn't time out over long printing periods. So I really had to collaborate with a team that was really good in this. But at the end of the day, the requirements of the artwork also push the science forward, because to date, this is still the largest known 3D printed scaffold for cell culture that's ever been made, because that was a requirement of the artwork. Likewise, it is this bright neon yellow color that I never would have aesthetically conceived of. And this is such an important visual aspect of this piece, but that was a requirement of the 3D printing and of the needs of the cells. It's like a B vitamin.
That's fantastic. And typically when you're working with different organizations to push the boundaries, how does one get involved with you to get that conversation started? Or how can they work with more artists to help push different aspects of their material or machine capabilities?
The first part of that is understanding the interest and the value. Here in Silicon Valley, there's some individuals that understand the value of art and design, but it's still a very underrepresented culture. Even at companies, when you think of like Apple or Google that really rely on their design and their designers, there's still not this awareness of the value that all of that brings to the final product. So as an artist, when I'm using the tools and technology, I can first show what it's capable of by doing these projects. If I'm using a 3D printer and I'm hacking it and bioprinting with it and doing all this kind of futuristic, that's like, wow, we didn't even know we can do this kind of stuff. Another value is bringing in siloed departments. Like when an artist, or when I go to work with a company, I have to depend on different departments. So I have to depend on like a biotech department, a nanotech department, material science, the printing, the software, and bring together that whole chain. So under the vision of something that is really exciting and can be public facing and tell this whole story about everything that goes into it, that brings together all these different departments and siloed departments. It brings up a lot of the excitement to actually work on this. And it shows a real world need of why we need to push the technology. When things are done in a lab, they're done usually on a really small scale. So usually like scaffolds or vasculature is done like, really, really small, like 1 centimeter by 1 centimeter max. And those stories aren't so visual and immediately understandable by a public. And the stories don't get out for, maybe a decade until the research is really viable and it can have repeatable results. As an artist, even if my work doesn't work, even if it's a failure, there's still a story to tell in that process.
And what are stories that you're planning to tell in the future that you're starting to ideate on, if you're allowed to share?
One of the, big moonshots that I'm working on, is sky is the limit in terms of additive manufacturing, is making a whole integrated system. An example is if we use the heart, doctors are starting to use AI to help them identify deformity and disease in ways that they couldn't do on their own. So AI can take a batch of really big data, like say 100,000 patient scans of healthy hearts, and then use somebody else's scan, like a current patient's scan, and compare it and say, oh, here's an area that could have a potential deformity or disease. Then the next step would be to have a generative engineering and design program, like a CAD program, propose new parts through machine learning. So what could be a replacement part for that? That could look like a healthy version that we currently know, or it could be something new. Then to use bioprinting, to use a patient's own genetic material to create a personalized replacement part that would have a lower risk of rejection, and top it off with a robotic assisted surgery to implant it, and personalized medicine, maybe even like an at-home desktop 3D printer that can have an internal monitor that can actually print day by day exactly what your body needs to keep that replacement healthy and to keep your body healthy. So these are the kinds of things that I am working towards. And now might be a good place to say I'm still looking for partners in machine learning and 3D especially. This is an area that I have a lot of interest and I've been working in somewhat, but this is an area that I'm looking to work in further, and then have a seamless integration with proposing new generative design and going through the whole process of fabrication and eventually ideally implantation. But as an artist, I can stop at the fabrication part and still tell that story. If it can potentially impact the healthcare and medical field, that would be great. A lot of times we don't know the benefits that come out of this until we work through the process and make these developments. And also, to me, what I'm interested in as an artist is opening minds to how we can use our technologies to empower us and enhance humanity. The companies I work with, the other values are different. So for them, it might be developing a new material or developing a new process or software or a different kind of digital approach. So we all have different value in our respective fields, and it's really a lot of fun to work together too.
The art that you're creating tells a story of what the future state can look like. By folks getting involved with the project early with you to help craft that story, you can simulate what the future might look like. And that's a great communication tool.
I think so. I think, my goal is more to learn to ask better questions, and empower others to ask better questions too. Because I think as soon as we start to say, oh, this is what the future is going to look like, we miss it. But if we start to ask questions about how we want to shape a more positive future, a more resilient future, a healthier future, a better environment, when we start to ask those questions and we learn to ask better questions, ask how we can develop our technologies and use our tools to help us get there, that's where the real benefit is and can be applied to any different field, but especially the tech field that is using and developing those tools.
And that said, you touched on a lot of things like machine learning, the different ways to use bioprinting based off of the data of the human or patient, and then being able to personalize experiences. What other future developments are you excited about for additive or bioacting or bioprinting or tech that can be introduced to help take this further or actually realize it?
Well, overall, I'm really interested in the accessibility and the ease of being able to use these technologies. Accessibility is a big issue right now. And even healthcare systems who do have access to it and do have the funding to it, it's still very difficult to use. And there's a lot of steps in the workflow. And that's where somebody like me as an artist, I'm willing to spend all these hours, go through all these processes. But when you're in a real world environment, in the lab and trying to save people's lives, you don't necessarily have the time to use and learn new technology. So the ease of use is something I'm really excited about, how we can make this accessible to a large population, to different income levels, and just really make healthcare accessible to more people through these technologies. So another thing that I'm really excited about, the future developments that we are on our way to, we haven't really done yet, but we're on our way to, is being able to print replacement parts, print organs and organoids. So organs are really excited to be able to print because we could help all these people that need transplants. I had a really good friend that recently passed away. Unfortunately, her name was Lisa, and she had a lung transplant. She had pulmonary hypertension. She was sick with this for 10 years. So she was like the perfect candidate for being able to grow her own lung, being able to bioprint and then grow her own lungs out of her own material instead of waiting for a transplant, because she did have that time before it was required. I'm excited about organoids and making new designs, because this is an area where we can say, oh, let's look at our structure of how our organs are currently made. how can we design these to work better? What do we learn in that process? Because when we think we know how something might work better, we might find it actually doesn't. The heart of evolution, this new work that I'm doing with the heart really points to some of these questions, because not only can we say, let's look at this structurally, like in the case of the heart, if we have one major blockage, we can have a heart attack and die. So it might be better to come together and have a whole network that if there's a blockage will still continue to work. I researched this further with cardiac surgeons and I made a proposed design. But the other aspect of this is questioning, if we make replacement parts, if they are different than what we're naturally endowed with, if we do transplant back into our body, who do we become because of that? So in the heart is the SID, emotional seat of consciousness. You know, it's the organ that we relate to love and deep feeling and sorrow, as well as a vital organ. If we replace that, do we become different people? Do we feel differently? And where does human modification and putting, whoever is building that in the lab or making that, what part of them gets reflected into that? Just like we're seeing now with our technologies that were intended to be for our good, like social networking, but we're seeing all these negative side effects from as well that were unintended results. I like to think they're definitely unintended. But now that we see them, what do we do about it? I'm trying to ask those questions in advance so we can be prepared.
That's very heavy loaded because it's hard to answer those questions.
But if we can ask better
yeah.
questions about it all the time and have those at our awareness,
Yeah.
at least we'll be thinking about it while we're embarking on that process instead of being surprised and shocked later.
And how far are we to have to make decisions on or have to have certain point of views outlined to then be managed by government to a certain degree? Like, when is this like a problem that we need to look at in 10 years time, 20 or 100 years time? Just curious.
We need to be looking at it now. We needed to start looking at it before, because as we're seeing with a lot of our technologies, they're developing more rapid than our government knows how to regulate or ask questions. And, when they're solely profit driven, this creates certain problems inherent in that structure. If we can take responsibility and start to ask these questions on the onset, we can build in better solutions from the start so we don't run into so many problems down the road. We still will. There'll be unexpected stuff that comes up. There always is when we use new technology and we integrate it. We learn more about ourselves as humans. We learn how we use it. We learn about how it impacts the environment. But if we can start to ask these questions ahead of time, we have a lot of information that can help us make more informed decisions, ask better questions, and lead to better technology. So it's really important that we do that.
And that said, what are 3 tips that someone venturing off in this space, whether it's into additive, into the philosophy and ethics of, bioprinting, or wanting to make a change in the way we live? I was curious, what are your perspectives on that?
That is to start with your passions and bring your passions to that technology, to the tool. So I see, a lot of electrical engineers that use 3D printing and additive manufacturing to make circuits. I bring my passion of looking at how we can heal and enhance ourselves, how we can be better people, how we could do better as society, how we could do better for our future. I bring those questions to the tools and technologies and my interest and passion for medical futuring. And so there's all these different ways that we can develop. Like I see a lot of fashion designers going into additive manufacturing and 3D printing. How can we make a knit all around the body in 3D with additive and robotics in ways that we haven't been able to before? You start to open the door to manufacturing where we can make individual pieces or prototypes that before you would have to make dies and casts for. So so it's about bring your passion to it, bring what you're interested to it. But these are practices we can actually start now. A lot of people have most people have cell phones and computers. There's a lot of free apps there. We can start with just looking at how do we use our technology? Are we happy with our relationship to our technology? Is there a way we can use it to become better people now? Is there a way that we have unhealthy habits that we want to curb, and to try to set up a structure so that we use it individually for ourselves, for our best and highest good? And that creating that kind of structure helps us be able to visualize what kind of questions we can ask to a larger audience and ask other people, are you having these struggles too? Are you having these challenges? Do you want something different? And when we start asking questions of, do you want something different? What do you want that to be? That's when we can start making innovations, and the creativity occurs of, how can we solve for that? How can we make this better?
So follow your passion and dive deep into different technologies and learn what you want. Keep questioning until you have more questions.
That's true.
And never
And,
stop questioning.
Yeah. And the reason I kind of have this perspective too is because I see additive manufacturing and exponential technologies by a lot of the people who work in it and create it as a mindset more than a tool set. So the tools might change, the tools might develop. In fact, they're developing faster than ever before. And that way they're exponential as well. But there's this mindset that we really want to use these tools to create a better world. And that goes back to like my childhood of, growing up in the home of IBM and having this very romantic notion of thinking we can use our technologies for our best and highest good. We can make a better world with that. And I do see a lot of people in the field truly embody that and believe that. And if we keep working towards that and work towards that together, I think we can make a lot of difference with our tools.
So Amy, if someone wants to work towards that with you, how do they get in touch with you?
You can contact me through my website, www.amykarle.com.
Thanks again for joining us at the Women in 3D Printing podcast type series. If you like the content, please hit that subscribe button, follow us on LinkedIn or other social media platforms.
We'd also like to give a shout out to our platinum sponsors, HP, Trumpf, GE Additive, Matter Hackers, and Dassault for making all of this even possible.
And feel free to drop us a line if you have any questions or feedback.